Director.
I ask consent that further proceedings on the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
This morning, the Banking Committee is examining 3 of President Biden's nominees to the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. The Fed is one of the most consequential institutions in America. Its decisions have massive ramifications for our citizens and for the world economy. At the same time, since its independence is paramount, the Fed's structure insulates the governors from short-term influence and political pressure. When an institution this important is this independent, the guardrails that confine its power are extremely important. Now, Congress has given the Fed a statutory mandate that is really very clear and very limited. The Fed's dual mandate is maximizing employment and stabilizing prices. That's it. That's what the Fed exists to do. The Fed is meant to serve as our central bank. It's not meant to act as an unelected super legislature that dabbles in broader economic policy making should it strike their fancy. Its current leader, Chairman Powell, understands this keenly. But unfortunately, President Biden's nominee for the powerful number 2 slot wants to destroy this crucial distinction. Less than 2 years ago, Sarah Bloom Raskin launched a PR campaign saying the unelected Fed governors should pursue liberal environmental goals that elected Democrats cannot get through Congress through the banking system. That bears repeating. President Biden's nominee for Fed vice chair wants unelected bureaucrats to financially bully the private sector into policy changes which lack enough support to become law the honest way. So let's get more specific. Ms. Raskin has argued repeatedly in print that the Fed should ideologically pick winners and losers in the energy market. In 2020, she said unelected bureaucrats should have excluded companies that employ Americans and produce American energy from widely available rescue loans because oil and gas are not green enough for liberals' liking. Now, this is the same old Democratic war on fossil fuels and middle America being smuggled into a dangerous new forum. Washington Democrats want to raise America's gas prices. They want to make electricity even less affordable. They want it to cost more to keep your family warm in the dead of winter. And now they want to do all this in a radical new fashion where voters could never hold them accountable. The stated justification for this power grab is that climate change may impact the future of our economy. So therefore, it's the Fed's business. What nonsense, with no limiting principle. Every major policy could affect our economy. Opening this Pandora's box would transform the Fed from an apolitical central bank into a hyper-political super legislature. It would turn the venerable institution that is supposed to safeguard the American dollar into enforcers for a radical agenda that can't make it through Congress. So, you better believe liberal activists are already acknowledging this would not stop with climate issues. They've got a whole list of ideological goals they'd like the Fed to literally force on our country. A year and a half ago, Democrats introduced legislation that would assign the Fed the mission of racial redistribution. They want to hardwire a kind of financial affirmative action plan into our banking system. Look, the American people don't want these wild ideas, so their elected representatives actually don't support them. Now the far left wants to transplant these radical campaigns out of Congress and onto our central bank, where American voters don't get a say. This is just another example of today's Democratic Party refusing to work within the basic rules and institutions, and instead trying to steamroll the guardrails to get their way. Ms. Raskin's crusade would hurt working families, kill American jobs, make our nation less independent, and cripple the Fed's independence in the process. And she wouldn't even need her colleagues' votes to do this damage. The vice chair for supervision has significant unilateral powers. She might be able to do this all by herself. Here's the bottom line. Working families can't afford a nominee who is dying to jack up their bills and gas prices. Kentuckians and middle Americans can't afford a central banker who wants to bankrupt our industries and kill our jobs. The global economy can't afford for the Fed to become a partisan battlefield. And the American people will not accept their central bank acting like some woke super legislature where citizens get no say. Now, on an entirely different matter, this week, two of America's closest partners in the Middle East made history. The UAE welcomed a president of Israel for the first time, laying another diplomatic stone on the foundation of the Abraham Accords. But within mere hours of President Herzog's historic arrival, we were reminded of the dangers that an increasingly violent Iran is willing to impose on anybody who pursues peace. For a third straight week, the UAE was targeted by a Houthi missile attack, of course made possible by Tehran. Last week, the terrorists targeted an air base that hosts 2,000 U.S. personnel. And it was American-made missile defense systems that intercepted the strike. The U.S. faces these same Iranian-backed threats alongside partners like Israel and the UAE. But you wouldn't know it. You wouldn't know it by looking at President Biden's foreign policy. A year ago, the State Department removed Yemen's Houthi terrorists from its list of foreign terrorist organizations. Since then, the Iranian proxy terrorists have only increased their attacks, underwritten by Iranian money and technology. So much so, in fact, that last month the Biden administration was reportedly considering reversing its decision. Iran's strategy is to use violence to drive the United States out of the Middle East. Small wonder they would double down on this strategy after the administration's humiliating retreat from Afghanistan. And the failure to respond forcefully to Iranian-backed attacks against U.S. troops in the region has eroded our deterrence and dramatically increased the risk to U.S. personnel. If this administration chooses to shrug or look the other way when terrorists target our friends and our interests, and if they continue to withhold military capabilities from partners threatened by Iran, then they should not pretend to be surprised when traditional American partners in the Middle East start looking to Moscow and to Beijing to fill the vacuum. Of course, the biggest distraction keeping this administration's attention from protecting our interests in the Middle East has been its ongoing obsession with returning to the Obama administration's failed 2015 nuclear agreement. Since President Biden took office, he's made rejoining the deal an overriding diplomatic objective. But by blaming their predecessors' maximum pressure approach and demonstrating an unwillingness to respond forcefully to Iran's backed terrorist attacks, the administration effectively took the threat of sanctions or military actions literally off the table, neutering their own diplomacy right at the outset. So it's no wonder hardliners in Tehran are holding out for more concessions from the softliners in Washington. Now look, it's not just Republicans who are concerned. Senator Menendez recently expressed similar concerns on the Senate floor, called upon the Biden administration, our partners, to, quote, exert more pressure on Iran to counter its nuclear program, its missile program, and its dangerous behavior around the Middle East, including efforts on American personnel and assets. Recent reports suggest some of Biden's own diplomats also share these concerns and have literally withdrawn from the team over concerns the administration's top negotiator is taking too soft a line on Tehran. So, Madam President, a year ago, Republicans made it clear to President Biden that his administration was interested in having a bipartisan foreign policy. They'd find willing partners here in the Senate. For my part, I recommended the President focus on securing bipartisan support for promises and threats so they could endure beyond his term in office. I urged him not to let foreign policy of the most powerful nation on earth be reduced to an etch-a-sketch, starting from scratch every 4 years. We don't often agree, but I was grateful to hear Chairman Menendez concur this week that, quote, the best guarantee of a sustainable diplomatic agreement with Iran and its international community is to build one that garners bipartisan political support. So look, I'm still hopeful that President Biden will finally recognize how uninterested Tehran is in negotiating in good faith. It's certainly not too late to start heeding good advice. It's not too late to start ratcheting up the pressure on Tehran and imposing serious costs when its proxies dare to challenge the U.S. It's not too late to try to craft a bipartisan approach to the Middle East. It's not too late to have a plan to contest Russian and Chinese influence in the Middle East. It's not too late to start nurturing the historic Abraham Accords and reassuring partners like Israel and the UAE that their engagement is backed by a rock-solid U.S. commitment. Unfortunately, a year of the Biden administration foreign policy